You know that thing inside you that tells you to not push a grandma on the street or like eat people? Yeah, that thing. Where does that come from? So it's day 4 of the coffee chats where we pull out a different theological question out of the coffee container every day. So today, to be honest, I cheated. I know what the question is, and that's because one of you put it in the comments from yesterday, and I wanted you to know that this is in real time. So today's question: where does morality come from, and is it objective? This is from Aaron Carpenter, so thank you, Aaron. First, I invite you to get a cup of coffee. I think this question is great, first because it doesn't ask if morality exists. Morality exists. The question is just, where does it come from and is it objective? Like, that is the question for morality. There's a lot of people that may be confused and think that atheists don't believe in morality. They don't believe in right and wrong. And then they criticize them for, writing about things being right or wrong. And there's room for that criticism, don't get me wrong. But the room for criticism is when the atheist pushes saying that they're objectively right or wrong. And we'll get back to that in a second. But to start out, where does morality come from? I think it's one of two things. Either one, there is some deity, some God that created us, and the morality comes from that God. And so the Christian inside of me would say morality exists because God is good and we're being measured against God's goodness. The atheist in me would say the other side of where morality could come from. It just comes from our brains. We are a species of Homo sapiens that have evolved a culture or morality, a herd-based survival technique that over literally millions of years has been evolved into us, that we all as Homo sapiens, all as people, feel this thing that we call morality. But it doesn't actually exist. It's only in our mind. So either morality that we all feel comes from God, or morality, again, that we all feel comes from evolution. Where do you think? Where does morality come from, and is it objective? And I think based on those two sources, the first one, obviously it's objective. And what do we mean by objective? Objective means outside of all people, right and wrong still exists. A subjective morality would say, okay, things are right and wrong because I believe that they're right and wrong. So here's an example that a theist would say, the Christian inside of me would say, okay, if the Nazis had won World War II and had literally exterminated all people that disagreed with them, so the only people alive believed what the Nazis did was good, it would still be bad. The war would still have been bad. The extermination would still have been evil, even though 100% of all moral creatures alive think it was good. That's what the Christian in me would say. And the Christian in me would ask the atheist in me, well, how do you respond to that? And the atheist in me would say, okay, one of two things. One, that's a good point. And two, that's kind of a short-sighted analogy, because there's another way to look at it. So you're asking me, the atheist, the Christian in me is asking the atheist in me, but I'm a person. I'm a human being. And so, I would agree that what the Nazis did was wrong because I have the same morality as you. We're both people. It's like if you were in the Matrix. Who are you going to ask in the Matrix if you're in the Matrix? 100% of the people in the Matrix are going to tell you, no, this is just reality. What do you mean by Matrix? Like, no, this is just reality because we're all in the Matrix. What if morality is like that? The atheist in me would say, what if morality is like that? How would you ever know? Who would you ask? What human would you ask to see if this is just a human evolved trait? Obviously, all humans would say that this is just something we all experience. How would you ever know? You would have to literally ask a conscious, moral being that is not human, which unfortunately on this planet, we don't have any of. We have no empirical evidence to point out and say, well, these things over there are moral agents that aren't human and they have a different set of moral codes. And therefore, ours is just based on how we evolved on this planet. Theirs is based on how they evolved on their planet, for instance. We don't have that. And so how would we know if what we experience as morality is just evolved? We don't know. And I don't know if we ever will, without having something to point at, like a God that could come down and say, no, actually, these are the moral standards because of me. We wouldn't know. But that raises a pretty challenging question for the atheist. Going back to the Nazi analogy. Are you really okay with saying what the Nazis did isn't actually wrong? Yes, to you, it's wrong. You think it's wrong. But it's not actually wrong. Because right and wrong doesn't actually exist if morality is just an evolved trait, like the eyeball. There's no right eye and wrong eye. It just is what it is. And so in the same way, we just evolved this way of viewing the world because it was advantageous for survival, for our species. Which means right and wrong doesn't actually exist. Pushing a grandma in the street isn't wrong. And risking your life to save another isn't right. Because right and wrong don't actually exist. Are you okay with living that way? You'd have to be if you say that morals are not objective, that they're just subjective, even if you say subjective not just to you, but for all people, for all humans. And that's a big thing to swallow, to be okay with, to walk around and say, you know, right and wrong does not exist. It's just a fabric of my imagination. It's bred into my DNA, but it doesn't actually exist. If there was no people, this whole notion of right and wrong wouldn't exist. That's really challenging to live. And so I think both sides have a valid point. The one side can just point at something that we all have and hold near and dear, this sense of right and wrong, and say, because of that, because we all feel this, like there has to be something that set that, or it doesn't really exist. They have a point. The other side, the atheist side of me, would say, there's no empirical evidence. It's just subjective. You're just pointing at the way we feel, which isn't how we find truth in any other field. You don't just say, you feel this way, therefore that's reality. That's not how science, philosophy, just anything works other than feelings. But we say it's okay for the moral argument, for instance, the existence of God. Those are my thoughts on where morality comes from and is it objective. In closing, if I had to guess, because I think this is a genuine question, one, I would say, I don't know if we will ever know if morals are objective. And I think the answer to these two questions are the same. If morals come from evolution, they're not objective, they're just subjective. If morals come from God, they are objective. It doesn't matter what we think. They just are what they are because God is who God is. And I don't know if we're ever going to know. I want to live a moral life. I hope you do too. But if I had to guess, it kind of seems like it's evolved, to be honest. Even 15 years as a Christian, the moral argument proving the existence of God, which is a very popular argument pointing to the existence of a God, it was never very convincing to me. It just rang like not true, not convincing. It seemed as though we were pulling at straws a little bit. Just, hey, you know how you feel this thing that you know you would feel regardless of if God existed or not? It proves God existed. But it's like, we would feel this regardless. So how does it have any bearing on God's existence? So it seems to me that it's evolved. However, again, I think it's more on the sidelines, on the question, on the bigger overarching question of does God exist? I think it has to sit on the sidelines, because it doesn't really have a knockdown argument one way or the other. Both sides have good points, but they're pretty neutral, to be honest. They kind of cancel each other out. But what do you think? Let me know down in the comments. Do you think morality is objective? And where do you think morality comes from? And if you have another question that you want to add to the coffee jar for day 5 tomorrow, put it in the comments. Thanks, and have a great day. Cheers.